And money is important in the organization of any city, because ownership of land is vital to the, you know, to the organization of the city and the way you read it. For example, this map shows, it's a cadastral map. This cadastral map होता है जिसमें property की lines दिखलाते हैं और roads की axis दिखलाते हैं. So you see the roads, you know, and streets, and everything else is plotted development. So what it shows is how the entire space of any city is claimed by owners. एक शहर के अंदर कोई भी जगह ऐसी नहीं होती जो जिसका कोई owner नहीं है. You know, try do anything in Mumbai, anything, किसी भी corner पे जाके, and you will find that there is an owner, whether it is municipal government, BMC, a private owner. So people carve up the entire city, and this is true for all cities across space and time, into these plots of ownership. That's one way to read the city. Who's the largest landowner? Where have they gotten this land from? And so on and so forth, right? So this is a series of maps that shows how this changes dynamically in different parts of the world. Ye Chicago ke maps hai. So I thought I'll, you know, show you a few images from Chicago. So 1913 se lekar, and then there is another, you know, there is another 4 maps there that would follow on the next one. And what we are showing is, jo dark brown color hai, uski high land value, right? So this is the central business district of Chicago in 1930. So darker the color, the higher the land value. Lighter the color, very low land value. So mostly residential areas, you know, would have lower value. Now this is very different. North America, the North American dynamic of land value is very different from land value dynamic, let's say in India. हमारे यहाँ दाम बढ़ते ही रहते हैं, you know, CBD के land value usually कभी-कभी कम हो जाते हैं, जैसे मुंबई में थोड़ा after the development of Bandra Kurla complex, Nariman Point, and you know, your more traditional Cuff Parade में real estate के दाम थोड़े से कम हो गए. Not too much, little bit, you know. Here in North America, it could be substantial, as you would see in the following images. So 1913 में CBD was, you know, this size, and along the lake, this is Lake Michigan. So this is the lake front. Just like seashore in Mumbai, the real estate prices were higher. About 1939, so this is after the Great Depression. You know, 1920s में Great Depression हुआ, उसके बाद 39 में economy is picking up, but the Second World War is coming right after 1942. But उसके पहले, you see prices go up, the area increases, then again it shifts. See, so if you had bought a plot here 1939, by 1965 it had become less in value. And then 1990 में, you know, the CBD expands, becomes almost like 2 CBDs. And north side, this is the north side of the city where real estate values go up, and on the south side they go down, right? See, इधर से देखें आप, and the south side में भी real estate values अच्छी खासी थी, there were pockets, and then it went down. And then what happened? And that trend continued. Once this trend sets up in the 1990s, that is sort of continued. CBD, now you look at the real estate prices, continues to grow on the south side. If you look at it in 3 dimensions, now this is a way of reading the city. As architects, we usually do not do this. We do not read the city through the lens of real estate values, but that's one way to read it, right? See अब now ये अब हम 3D में देख रहे हैं 1913 में. So you see there were, you know, wherever there were major road intersections, the real estate value was reasonably high. And green is, you know, this is very residential, so compared to it. But the CBD you see stands out, and see how the CBD moves. By 1990, yeah, it's like sucking it in. और ये सारे गायब हो गए, ये छोटे-छोटे वाले जितने भी ये, and see it flattens out, and this goes up. और इस area, ये जो second CBD form हो रहा है, इसकी भी value बढ़ने लग गई. And then this is 2005, yeah, and that's that expansion of. So the real estate values themselves had changed dramatically. South side of the city has lost a lot of real estate value, and the north side of the city has begun to do very well. So that's one way to sort of thinking of. So this kind of city building, ये जो होते हैं ना larger forces, ये architecture को shape करते हैं. And as architects, we need to be keeping an eye on these larger city and state and national and global level dimensions that change. Now, having said that, the city building work, when you sort of pay attention to those, you realize that it's a very broad enterprise, which involves diverse range of actors. बहुत सारे लोग, सब जने city building की खास बात ये है कि इसमें बहुत सारे लोग involved होते हैं. We think it's only the government, it's only the BMC जो अपना एक master plan बना देगी और MMRD कुछ plan बनाएगी और transportation वाले बनाएंगे और सब उसको follow करेंगे. That's one way to think of it. And governments and government agencies hope and believe that unka master plan everyone has to follow. Not really true. People make their own plans. Developers have their own plans. Builders make their plans. Architects, designers, practitioners do their own thing. Politicians make very important plans. They also make deals. And some of them are very corrupt deals. Then squatters, informal settlement residents, the different kinds of planning efforts that sort of come together and then shape this kind of city building at the larger scale. So, अब जो plans का perception है वो change हो रहा है उस तरीके से. We don't think कि हमने एक plan बना दिया तो वो चीज वैसी की वैसी होनी चाहिए. We think of plans as partial and flexible and provisional. Why do we do this? Because जैसे जो master plan बनते हैं वो normally we make them for a 20-year horizon. This is let's say 2021 तो हम अभी अगर master plan बनाएंगे जैसे दिल्ली का भी बना है, it's a draft stage, it just came out a few weeks ago. So 20 years horizon, 2041 के लिए बनाएंगे. The argument against it is that the technology changes so fast and life quality changes so fast, requirements change so fast, it's very difficult to predict what would happen in 20 years. So थोड़ा सा flexible रखें, थोड़ा उसके अंदर ऐसे options रखें कि things can change. So plans go within the discipline of planning and design. We sort of see as precise, partial and provisional. All-encompassing master planning is both unrealistic and undesirable. वो realistic हम बनाते हैं plan को जब तक 10 साल बाद पता चलता है उसमें से 50% चीजें नहीं कर पाए. So we should not carry this burden on our shoulder. In other words, we should say, hey, this is the plan that sort of does some major things, but leaves a lot of things that we can decide as we go forward. So from this lens, from this kind of reading, you realize that cities are very complex places built very incrementally by diverse urban actors over many generations. धीमे कई, जैसे Mumbai, the city of Mumbai, how many generations now? Almost 12, 13 generations have contributed. Each generation changes about 25 years. So Mumbai has been around 250 years. So 8, 10, 12 different generations, very incrementally, have added pieces to it, rather than a few state-sponsored plans. State or government likes to think, "Hamara plan koi sabko follow karna hai." That would be the most powerful plan, but it's not true. And oftentimes these master plans can do more harm than good if they've not done judiciously. So that's sort of the changes which have begun to happen. And these plans rarely act alone. Many different plans, as we were talking about, they come together, and we can discuss this more often in the discussion section. But these people say this is good, that we don't have a singular master plan, that we have many different plans, and these plans do different things together, and they come together, they talk to each other. It's a constellation of plans, and at the city level, at the higher level, that's how city building takes place. So I want to share some insights from a case that I recently studied, National Capital Region, Delhi ke aspas, but Mumbai is similar, Bangalore, Calcutta, Chennai. Think any large Indian city, similar story, but I sort of used National Capital Region, NCR, Delhi, as a case to study ki kaun plan bana raha hai, right? Who's making the plans? Who's got the money? So these are clients for architects. That's, as I said, that's one way to read the city. Who's got the money? Who's making the plans? What kind of plans they are making? What kind of designs they want? So that's sort of the scale for architects to think in terms of their possible contribution in shaping urban India. So ये NCR का map है, as many of you know. NCR centers on the NCT, which is the National Capital Territory. So NCT of Delhi, which is right at the center, but NCR includes districts from the surrounding states. Is one, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. So all of this is NCR. And this is sort of the area. Total about 33,000 square kilometers. Quite a bit of it is rural, right? Many of these districts are still rural. And this is highly, highly urban. So it's a very interesting area. It's recognized as a planning unit. So there is a special act of Indian Parliament that recognizes NCR as a spatial planning unit. And there is a planning board. It's called NCRPB, National Capital Region Planning Board, which has statutory authority, and they make a master plan for this entire NCR. And then the states within make plans for their own NCR sub-area. So Rajasthan has a plan for its sub-area of the NCR, and similarly Haryana and UP and so on and so forth. Now this was made in 1950s. The idea was coined first in 1950s. By late 1960s, mid 1960s, they sort of began to put various pieces of NCR together. And I think the act came about in 1970s. By 1980s, NCR had already made their first plan, and then they updated it, and now they have a third plan. India, as we sort of know, our economy was not doing well till 1990s, but after liberalization, after 1990s, sort of the economy took on a major growth push. And that's the time when money began to sort of flow into NCR after 1990s. So until 1990s, the story of NCR, or many places in India, you would sort of, if you read the literature, वो ये है कि सरकार प्लान बनाती है और बहुत सारे लोग फॉलो नहीं करते हैं. So informal development हो जाता है Indian cities में, और एक तरफ formal development है. So the story of Indian planning is often told through this, some formal and much informal. It's like a dichotomy, kala or safed. There is no shades of gray, right? It's either formal, approved by the state agency following the master plan, or informal, or kuch nahi. This tarike se, that's the way story is told. But essentially, no. I started tracking spatial plans in this area from the 1990s, so it's almost 25 years. And I found four main kinds of plan making activity. Number one is state-sponsored plans at various spatial scales. 1990 के बाद से जब से सरकार के पास पैसे आए, government has begun to make many different kinds of plans, and the government is putting in some serious money, and ये spatial different scales पे है ना? For example, this is Rajasthan's NCR planning and monetary sale, and they've sort of they've taken big on. So they're making master plans for different cities within the NCR area. They're also making plans for urban complexes, right? 3 small cities close to each other. So they made one composite plan for that area. They're making tourism plans for areas within this. Now, there are 2 kinds of plans. One is mandated plans like master plans. Mandated plan का मतलब क्या होता है जिसको आपको बनाना ही है. You've been tasked for making that plan by a state legislation. So each state has a act, a town planning act, and that requires that master plans for largest cities should be prepared. So mandated plan, but they have to make it. Non-mandated plan, it's not required by law, but most state governments would make such plans. For example, irrigation ka plan, forest areas ka plan, tourism ka plan. So it's these plans are important. They carry legal standing. They are very frequently challenged in courts, but they are not all, so इनका ये process चलता रहता है. There are both existing agencies and then there are new agencies that the government has set up to make these both mandated and non-mandated plans. A good example is road network. What you see is, across India, national highway authorities of NHAI, for example, at the national level. And then the states have their own road development corporation, and local governments And then there is Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Sampark Yojana, right, which connects rural hamlets to the nearest road. So working at different scales, right? Gaon ki scheme, city ki, regional, state level ki roads, or national level ki roads. Different actors working together, different governments, yeah, from the local government to the Jilla Panchayat to the rural development wing to the state PWD, to the state roadways road development corporation, to national high. Sometimes CPWD get involved, sometimes railway gets involved when the road crosses. You can imagine how many different actors have to work together and coordinate to sort of create a road network. So, and the road ka jo plan hota hai, is very important. You guys need to pay attention. Town planning wale koi bhi naksha bana le. Architects would sort of follow that town planning's map. But the road, when it comes through a new area, changes dramatically the whole complexion. The real estate values go up wherever the road comes. The plot fronting the road automatically go up, and that changes the entire dynamic of the area. Then people don't care for the town planning connection. They care for what's the real estate market and how should they be responding to it, right? So that's why for architects, important to pay attention to the larger thing, larger dynamic beyond that plot boundary, right? You guys, we train you on that working within on that plot level in architecture schools, and that's very important that you learn the craft of designing a building. But what I am coaching you for or alerting you for is the larger picture, as you said, beyond that plot, right? So road network is a good example. The second kind of plans that are being made are sectoral plans. जो एक सेक्टर के लिए बन रहे हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल इलेक्ट्रिसिटी डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी प्रोडक्शन एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, ये एक सेक्टर है. इकोनॉमिक सेक्टर, रोड सेक्टर, इलेक्ट्रिकल सेक्टर, यूटिलिटी सेक्टर, वाटर सप्लाई सेक्टर, इरिगेशन सेक्टर, फॉरेस्ट सेक्टर. Sectoral plans भी बहुत सारे बन रहे हैं certain level. They sort of centered around the initiative of state agencies and public sector undertakings in a public sector. For example, they may neither be, इनकी खास बात ये होती है कि ये चुपचाप, they are very silent, right? You do not pay, if you're not paying attention, you would sort of miss this. They're sort of as the hidden hand of the state, and they're oftentimes conceived in a piecemeal and disjointed fashions by different actors. A good example is Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. Now, much work has happened on this already. I've been following this for, as I said, for a couple decades. And this contains many different, you can imagine number of architectural projects that are sort of part of this vast corridor. It's a brand new industrial corridor. Again, many different actors, state level, central level, local level, working together. And that are sort of creating, these investment regions and industrial areas of vast size across, the entire geography. So that's second kind of plans, and they are important because they promote basic infrastructure. Then the third kind of plans, which architects are most familiar with, are project plans, which are sort of specific site level. They could be around tourism. They can be around, this is an example from the Rajasthan state sub-region plan that sort of seeks to promote tourism activity in Rajasthan in the area of Arbor, which is part of NCR. So that's the third kind of plans, project plans. They're very specific. They could be for township development. They could be, integrated cities, housing estates, but project level, right? So state plans, mandated, non-mandated. Second one, we talked about sectoral plans. And the third one is project level plans. They're mostly private, but there are also public players. For example, central government agencies setting up different kind of training institutes, universities, IITs, Indian Institute of Management, new school of planning and architecture in various cities. So they could be private, they could also be public, they could also be non-profit or NGOs. So many different players that are sort of doing this kind of retail level work. In architecture, we historically have thought of our clients as only either private state, a developer, or sometimes government agencies. What I'm alerting you is that within the government, there are many different kind of agencies that are very different from each other. DMC, for example, a very old colonial institution that goes back to 19th century. MMRDA, much newer, 1950s, right? And then there are SIDCO, 1980s. And then there are even newer, like NHAI, which was set up only in 2000s. Yeah. So government agencies also are of various kind, various different thinking, various different scales they operate at. So that it's a variegated spectrum that has arisen, and architects should be paying attention to it. And the fourth kind of plans are informal and tacit and unforeseen and spontaneous. ये अपने आप होते रहते हैं, ये लोग करते रहते हैं. Informal settlements is a good example of this. Someone actually plans informal settlements. Informal settlements do not happen overnight or do not happen without design. They're very clever design. People identify locations, and these are well-connected sites. And then they develop, and they have an economy of their own. For example, Dharaveen has been studied in great detail. It's a working community. It's a blue-collar, productive. These are productive places. So, yes, spontaneous plans. इस पे भी we should be paying attention to, and it's the four plans, the four different kind of these four plans. That sort of the four different kinds that I was explaining. They interact with each other. State के plans हैं, sector के plan हैं, project plans हैं, और ये informal plans हैं, and they sort of talk to each other. They negotiate. They certain times these plans are more powerful. Certain times the informal plans are more powerful. For example, a good example of this would be when they were trying to set up the nano Kharka plant in Bengal, and the informal plan sort of impeded the state plans, and people got sort of organized and they said, no, we don't want it in Nandigram, and they eventually had to take the car plan to someplace else, right? So can we say this plan is more important than the other one? I am not so sure. But what we can certainly say that in India at this point in time, with all this urbanization and with all this focus on cities, there is an increasing amount of public and government and social attention towards cities. There's a lot of money that's coming into cities at these different scales, as I showed you. And that's creating a dynamic that as architects, we should be paying attention to. If we don't pay attention to it, then we get limited to the site, and anything which is outside the site, we do not think it is in our purview. Few of us think, people, almost half of the town planners in India come from an architecture background. So if you went after your BRs to do a master's in urban planning or urban design, then you sort of become more aware of it. But I'm saying even as every architect in India today, whether in school or whether in whatever capacity, whether they're teaching students, whether they're working professionally or intellectually or socially, need to be aware of this, that the city dynamic is more important. We have mastered the craft of designing, as I said, within the plot boundaries. But what's outside, in India, we need to be paying more attention to, right? So these four different kinds of plans are shaping. So to summarize, reading the contemporary city in India, you find that the planning practice is undergoing largely invisible, but substantial changes, including the emergence of different kinds of plan, creating many fresh opportunities for professionals shaping the built environment. So as architects, you could, actually, if you pay attention to this and you seek opportunities with all this major planning and fiscal investment going on, rather than saying, we need to branch out, we need to diversify our profession. And this is one way to think about it. The plan making is moving away from an exclusively state-centered focus. सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है कि सरकारी प्लान बनाती है, जैसा मैंने आपको दिखाया, सरकार की अलग-अलग एजेंसीज हैं, अलग-अलग मैंडेट है, प्राइवेट सेक्टर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, नॉन प्रॉफिट सेक्टर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, and Communities and people's plans are very important. Politicians play a major role in shaping plan making. And these changes are mostly in line with larger shifts in the country's polity. जैसे एक देश की, you know, this has sort of been now, there is enough uh, uh, empirical evidence in favor of the argument कि जैसे जैसे एक देश का नेशनल थिंकिंग बदलती है, वैसे वैसे प्लानिंग का अप्रोच टू प्लानिंग बदल जाता है. You know, so India में larger जो changes हो रहे हैं वो that sort of show up at this planning level. So that's the summary, and I want to open it for discussion and questions and answers at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. We'll open the forum for the students to interact with you. I think we
Sure.
had a real large picture of things happening and how they interact with each other on different platforms at multiple scales. It was really interesting to understand it. We open the forum for questions from the students and from the faculty.
Yeah.
You all can either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can put it in the chat box. It would be nice if you speak, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And speak. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Or इससे भी, to add to what Uttara said, is another question which is sort of observation, comments, but this is important that we do it.
Hello, students.
Hello.
Yes, Ria, you can put your question.
Yeah, so my question is, what would be the role of an architect or an urban planner to like the problem of migration that is constantly happening from rural to urban areas, and in the urban areas the population is increasing constantly, so it is very difficult to deal with the urban infrastructure. So what would be the future solution in coming years?
That's a good question, Ria. ये जो आपने रिया ने जो पॉइंट उठाया, ये बड़ा it's a this question has animated the interest of planning discipline since its founding last 100-150 साल से, कि लोग शहर में आते हैं, अब इसका क्या करें, how to deal with urbanization. Now इसमें जो thought है, planning thought, that has continued to shift. पहले ये सोचते थे हम कि लोगों को शहर में नहीं आना चाहिए, है ना, नहीं आना चाहिए इसको, we should stop this. So right after independence, 1950s के decade में, 60s में, 70s में, even 80s तक, the planning thought was we have to stop this migration somehow. We can stop the migration in two ways, people argued. One is sort of, by controlling the push and pull factors. What is the push? So गांव से push ये होता है कि गांव में आपके पास, you do not have access to many things, many urban amenities. School अच्छे नहीं है, hospital अच्छे नहीं है, market नहीं है, education नहीं है, बच्चों की पढ़ाई नहीं है, and so on and so forth. Right? That's the push from the village. And what's the pull from the city? The pull from the city is कि city के अंदर बहुत सारे attractions हैं, city के अंदर आपको amenities मिलती हैं, and which is kind of true, है ना? So the argument then shifted from कि गांव में भी ये सारी चीजें प्रोवाइड की जाए, right? So our president Kalam Saab had this idea called Pura, provision of urban amenities in rural areas, and the idea was कि हम गांव में भी ये सब चीजें प्रोवाइड कर दें तो लोग सिटी में जाएंगे. India is at this point in time is at that stage where we're saying we would also create similar kind of amenities in in rural areas over a period of time. Can we, as planners, control this? No, no. It's a democratic country. People have rights. Each one of us can choose to live in any Indian city. Buy property, migrate, live. That's sort of the basic right of any citizen of any country, unless you control it with dramatic means, as they do in China. कि आपके पास हर जगह का passport. So Mumbai has its own, not a passport, but every resident has a card that identifies कि उसका कहाँ, where do they live, and then they can work only in that area and access services only in that area. So unless वैसा कोई measure हो जो मुश्किल है, so that means we can't control. हम population का immigration control नहीं कर सकते. हम उसको ये कोशिश कर सकते हैं कि उसको वो all those provisions, if people are getting services and amenities where they live, and that's the most we can do, and hope that people live there. But people move, and people move around. So and cities have a special place in people's imagination. And as is clear now, almost 50% of global population lives in cities, and more people want to move to cities. So just छोटे शहर में वो थोड़े बड़े में जाना चाहता है, बड़ा वाला और बड़े में जाना चाहता है. मुंबई वाले न्यूयॉर्क के अलावा कम ही जगह जाना चाहते हैं, right? I mean, when Mumbaikars move, it's only to a few places. They don't move to many places. I haven't met many Mumbaikars moving to Bhandara or moving to, Ajmer. No. Mumbaikars might. So there is this metropolitanization, that's what we call it. Smaller cities and bigger cities. That kind of migration takes place. And this migration is difficult to control at some level. This is the lesson that we have learned, Priya, in 100 years. कि हम इसको control नहीं कर सकते. हम ऐसी कोशिश कर सकते हैं कि गांव में भी कुछ या smaller settlements में भी amenities हो, but bigger cities में we have to plan for and provide for people to come and live and work and play. This is expensive, right? Cities में बहुत पैसे लगते हैं कोई भी चीज बनाने में. But people want to live in cities, and we would have to provide for people to come and live in cities. That's where the discourse stands currently. Does that answer your question?
But also the architects love to practice in urban areas. They don't want to go after their BH degree. They won't go to rural areas and practice. So even there is a role of architect also in developing rural areas. Also there is NRM, National Rural Mission, that the government is creating 300 smart cities in India. So if architects could join hands with them and help them in development also, that's would be your suggestion.
Absolutely. Well, that's the way to think of it.
There's a question in the chat box. In the post-liberal context, is there a scope for urban planners to integrate a people-centric participatory approach in design? This is by Shreya Rangaraj.
No, good question, Shreya. आपका बिल्कुल है. There is this scope is in fact increasing. The idea is, Shreya का question for rest of the audience, कि participation को थोड़ी, in democratic societies, the idea is user का participation होना चाहिए. As architects, we know this. We work closely with clients, various stakeholders. But as the scale shifts from private to public, the importance of participation becomes even more. Private client है अगर, या मैं कोई private building बना रहा हूँ, then my stakeholders are very limited, right? अगर client राजी है, so then my project is fine. I might speak to one or two more people, maybe the financer if they're different from the client, or maybe one contractor. Maybe I solicit an expert's opinion, but that's sort of the domain or the universe of where I'm getting advice from, right? Private project में much easier. जैसे ही public project हो गया तो उसमें तो बहुत सारे लोग आ गए. You know, users, residents, decision makers, local politicians, officials, and so on and so forth. So Shreya's question sort of gets to this idea. Is that improving? My sense is yes. Historically, Indian planning system has been very top down and top heavy. You know, कोई मीटिंग होती है उसमें अगर चीफ मिनिस्टर ने बोल दिया ये ऐसे होगा तो सारे जने एक ही चीज बोलते हैं यस सर. Very rarely someone says no sir. You know, it's a very top down, or it's not, and that's the culture of the place. हमारा system ऐसा ही है. हमारे घर परिवारों में भी, you know, the senior most person, we sort of listen to them, and you know, we give a lot of respect to elders and people in position of power. So अब वो ये कह रहे हैं कि नहीं, इसको थोड़ा सा ओपन करो यार, लोगों से भी बात करो जिसको एक्चुअली वो जगह यूज करनी है, या जो उस जगह में रहता है, या जो, you know, users and residents are the most important participants for any public place, rather than a remote state bureaucrat or a politician. वो तो मंत्रालय में, उसको तो पता नहीं वो कब आएगा और कब रहेगा या कब नहीं रहेगा, but they are decision makers, they are important people. Is this shift going on? So yes, Shreya, that shift is happening, and I think it's become more public oriented, the manner in which we do planning and designing work in India than it was 20 years. Is it excellent? Does it match world level yet? No. Other places have much more participatory based planning, but we have begun to move in that direction. Kam chalu ho gaya hai. We are sort of beginning to move positively in a better direction. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Sanjeev, I have a question for you. This is Swanand here. So
Yes,
basically, I wanted to ask you, can we look at social infrastructure of a region or a part of the city maybe, where in the infrastructure is, we are just questioning the concept of infrastructure right now. Can we look at this aspect of social infrastructure to understand a region in depth, or I'll reframe the question. In what manner can we look at infrastructure and civic amenities to map a certain city? Because you mentioned about economics, land economics, some political other areas which are there. So how can we look at civic amenities and social infrastructure to understand the area within a city, or to map it in a simpler way?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. So इसके दो मैं part समझता हूँ आपके इस question के. You know, the way I sort of read the question is एक तो हम first is mapping, right? We want to map the urban amenities or social infrastructure. If we club the two, we can distinguish. We can also club school, park, hospital, primary health center, dispensary, shopping markets, bus stands, you know, various kind of urban amenities. वो किसी area में कैसे हैं? So Google Map के ऊपर सबसे पहले मेरे ख्याल से the easiest today is Google Map, taking that as the base layer, because you know it's updated. People can share it across studio, different teams. So Google Map की वो layer लगाकर उसके ऊपर ये सारी चीजें लगा लें. Number one, yeah, road structure, and then these amenities, and you can actually create a layer in Google Maps and sort of put these and mark these. The second is, now this is critical. This is where Swanand's question essentially gets to in my reading. ये तो मैंने आपको technical बड़ा basic सी चीज बताई. The social, ultimately, the social infrastructure shapes the spatial form and vice versa. The spatial form of एक area का होगा ना, that shapes up कि वहां पर क्या social infrastructure है. जो अमीर एरिया होगा ना, कफ परेड का एरिया या साउथ मुंबई का, उसमें सारी मिल जाएंगी अर्बन एमिनिटीज, और जो धारावी का होगा ना उसमें नहीं मिलेंगी. ना क्यों नहीं मिलेंगी? जो सेम बीएमसी है, सेम राज्य सरकार है, सेम वोट देते हैं, सेम केंद्र सरकार है, सेम इनकम टैक्स रूल है. दिस इज वेयर स्वानंद's क्वेश्चन गेट्स टू, इज दैट द सोशल एंड स्पेशल आर इंटरलिंक्ड. अलग नहीं होते दोनों. You know, they go hand in hand together. जो अमीर लोगों का एरिया होता है उसमें सब चीज आ जाती है, whether साउथ दिल्ली, साउथ मुंबई, नॉर्थ शिकागो, राइट? उसमें social infrastructure follows, and the spatial form looks like this. and it's this not, and this is incremental city building. वो आज के आज नहीं हो गया, 50 साल से धीमे 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 बीएमसी के बजट में हमेशा एक दो आइटम आते रहे उस एरिया के, इस एरिया के नहीं आते रहे. So it all added up in 50 years. And after 50 years, when you do this mapping Swanand is talking about, then you say, wow, look at the social infrastructure in this area and the urban form in this area, and then look at the social form and urban form. That's the kind of discrepancy a mapping like this produces. So, bilkul theek hai aapka question. And but social or spatial saath mein chalenge. They are never, it's the social that creates the spatial. Building अपने आप नहीं बनती है, उसको समाज बनाता है, right? या तो आर्किटेक्ट बनाता है, या सिविल इंजीनियर बनाता है, या मिस्त्री बनाता है. वो तो एजेंसी है. These guys are agencies. But there is a money that's coming from somewhere. Who's putting in that money? Is it a state? Is it a sarkar? Is it a non-profit? Is it a public agency, right? See where the money is coming. And what's their interest? जो पैसा लगा रहा है उसका interest क्या है? या property speculation है, या उसको नाम कमाना है, या उसको कोई right? So you want to be paying attention to this backstory, which as architects we often do. हम कहते हैं ना ये देख मेरा plot है, इसका FSI है, इसकी IT है, इसका building coverage है, मैं ऐसा नक्शा बनाऊंगा, ये form है, ये follow function. We deal with a different vocabulary, and that's very important, extremely important at the plot scale. But जैसे ही आप plot के बाहर देखते हो, and Swanand's question get you outside of the plot. It says urban area में social amenity. Then all of this dynamics comes through. And it's important now, at this point in time in India, जब इतनी सारी चीजें हो रही हैं, इतना सारा शहर में पैसा आ रहा है, हम architects के number बढ़ गए. When Uttara and I graduated, I think मेरा Council of Architecture registration number is 13,000. I think today it's like what 1,30,000, or maybe even more, 1,50,000. Right? It's quick. It's boomed, which is a good thing that there is more of us. So रिया तो गांव नहीं जाना चाहती है, but बाकी लोग तो जा सकते हैं. चलो गांव नहीं जाए तो थोड़े छोटे शहर में जा सकते हैं यार. चलो कम से कम औरंगाबाद तो जा सकते हैं मुंबई से, राइट? नागपुर जा सकते हैं, अकोला जा सकते हैं. And there is this work is happening across the country. It's happening everywhere. As I showed you, Delhi Mumbai industrial corridor, all these new settlements, and they need designers and planners and all this civic amenity work. That's the scale. Public places, civic amenities, social amenities. कितने पार्क बनने, कितने प्लाजाज इंप्रूव होने, कितने वाटर फ्रंट पे पार्क होना, कितनी कंप्लीट स्ट्रीट्स बननी है, कितने बाजार टाउन्स का रिहैबिलिटेशन होना. The huge scope, huge. But थोड़ा सा बड़ा सोचना पड़ेगा, है ना? मतलब you would have to think more creatively as an architect. That's the argument I make.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sanjay. I think the explanation really enlightened me a lot, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for the explanation.
So I actually had a doubt, carry forwarding Swanand sir's question. While we understand social and the infrastructure or services coming hand in hand, where is the place for the existing land and its own topography in consideration of economical point of view, or where does ecology come in place while talking about economics or talking in the scale of economics while developing a city? Because most often we tend to talk about social and services as an infrastructure that go hand in hand, but in order to develop that, where is the place of land, the existing land and its own topography in place?
So fantastic question, Shreya. Unfortunately, what you say is true for a long time. And US is a great example of this. US में जो इन्होंने planning की, US का size है India से 3 times का physical size. India बहुत बड़ा देश है. We are one of the largest countries. But imagine United States 3 times physical size, और इनकी population is 4 times less than us. And they sort of, the urbanization of United States from the founding of New York to the founding of Los Angeles, that's an entire continent, है ना, ये urbanization. सबसे पहले न्यूयॉर्क बना, ईस्ट कोस्ट पे colonists showed up, पूरा देश खाली था, फिर वेस्ट कोस्ट वाली cities बनी, लॉस एंजलिस, सैन फ्रांसिस्को, Seattle and so on and so forth. तो ये जो था ये 150 years में सारा urbanization हो गया. हमें इंडिया में urbanization में, हमारा urbanization is at least 3,000-4,000 years old. You know, cities like Nashik and cities like Banaras and cities like Tanjavur have been around for at least 2,000-4,000 years. इतनी सारी layers है. ये हो गया US में 100 years में. कैसे हुआ? जो श्रेया कह रही है वैसे हुआ, सिर्फ economy का consideration करते हुए. No one was paying interest to any ecology, any terrain, any topography. एक gridiron pattern लिया, you know, gridiron pattern, सीधी road 90 degrees पे, और उसको लगा दिया न्यूयॉर्क से लेकर LA तक. Can you imagine that scale? 3 times the size of India. Gridiron pattern. No left, no right, no confusion. That's why all American cities have a gridiron pattern. North, south, east, west. Tack. Like a blueprint planning. But that has changed. I suspect, or I think, for example, जब हम लोग कॉलेज में पढ़ते थे late 80s में, तब से, और इनफैक्ट उसके भी कुछ साल पहले से, the idea of ecology and environmental design and green technology and sustainable future development had begun to sort of come in. और आज की तारीख में, as we speak, in the second decade, the third decade of the 21st century, 40-50 साल हो गए उस बात को, श्रेया. And there is a large agreement, at least within the discipline of architecture and planning. Professors, all teachers are very aware of this. All students very aware of this. कि environmental एक तो हमारी life का challenge है, और दूसरा social है. Architecture and design and planning happens within sort of time, space and time. हमारे लिए, हमारी generation के लिए, और आपकी generation के लिए और ज़्यादा, दो है major challenges. One is environmental challenge or ecological, and the second is social. Can we have, and it's true, whether it's India or whether it's other parts of the world. Socially क्या हम चीजों को ठीक कर सकते हैं, और हम climatically, environmentally, ecologically changes. So my answer to Shreya's question would be कि historically कम था, पर अब ये बढ़ता जा रहा है. And आपकी generation को तो और भी ज़्यादा. Economy and economy important है. Economy is important. You want to give a better quality of life to everyone. But ecology is equally, if not more, important. Given the current state of climate change, given the current change of unsustainable extraction of resources, India में तो और भी ज़्यादा. Climatically, we are one of the more vulnerable sections, one of the vulnerable areas of the planet. और फिर population, तो हमें तो environment पे और ज़्यादा ध्यान देना. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Anuj, one of our professors, has 2-3 questions for you. One is, he says, thank you for letting us know that architects need to look beyond the side boundary. So that was very nice of you. He's asked a question that he was watching a 1972 documentary on Mumbai, which raised flag that the city is overpopulated. It is in 2021, and we are still here increasing in numbers. So he wants your comment, and your comment on smart cities political agenda or the need for the art. Are they looking into cultural context and history of the city? This is with respect to Mumbai.
No, good questions, Anuj. All three. Pehla wala, 72 se bhi pehle, in fact, the Britishers had I think this is 1930s or early 1940s. This is definitely before Bhore Committee. Bhore Committee was a committee that the colonial British government set up for all India in early 1940s. So, उससे भी पहले 1930s में ये बात क्लियर हो गई थी कि मुंबई इज बिकमिंग ओवर पॉपुलेटेड. सो 1970 तो डेफिनेटली. What do we mean by over population would be a question. अगर डेंसिटी वाइज देखें, डेंसिटी वाइज, सो मुंबई से भी डेंस जगह है. Hong Kong would be closer in my suspicion is in terms of actual net density. Parts of Hong Kong would be similar as in Mumbai. And other cities might also come closer. Bigger question, Atul, here to my mind was, Anuj, the way I sort of read this, I mean, apart from all other reasons, a major reason was कि पैसे ही नहीं थे. Cities बनाना पैसे का काम है, मुश्किल काम है. It's not easy. मुंबई बीएमसी का बजट बहुत सारी इंडियन स्टेट से ज्यादा होगा, त्रिपुरा से ज्यादा होगा, पौंडीचेरी से ज्यादा होगा, मणिपुर से ज्यादा होगा, नागालैंड से ज्यादा होगा बीएमसी का बजट. I'm not talking MMRDA, I'm not talking other, सिर्फ BMC. Cities are expensive business. And remember, India was a poor country, and some would argue we still are a poor country compared to what our potential is or our standing in the world. So पैसे ही नहीं थे. तो पैसे नहीं थे तो बना ही नहीं कुछ. When I was a kid, there was a Bajaj scooter खरीदने के लिए लाइन लगती थी. You had to book a Bajaj scooter. It took 3-4 years before you got your scooter, right? I mean, today you call up BMW का showroom, वो कल घर पे आ जाएगा आपके कि सर कौन सी वाली गाड़ी लेकर आओ. The dramatic difference in the economy. Phone भी नहीं मिलते थे. For landline, for example, the waiting list was 7-8 years. What I'm trying to say is कि yes, your point is well taken कि Mumbai is overpopulated, but that's remained true, and it would remain true because people would continue. This we have seen historically in different parts of the world, like Tokyo. Tokyo ki Mexico City, New York City. People like this. The form would change, the social structure would change, ecological parameters would shape that urban dynamic. But people like these big, giant urban areas to live in. NCR is a fantastic example. Mumbai region is a fantastic example. So आपको provide तो करना पड़ेगा, बिल्कुल करना पड़ेगा. You would have to provide amenities and services that Swanand was talking about. आप थोड़ी कह सकते हो कि मुंबई में या NCR में मत आओ या मुंबई में मत आओ, टोक्यो में मत आओ या न्यूयॉर्क में मत आओ. And that's going on. I mean, these are giant urban spaces. Then your third point, smart cities wala. There is मैं आपको अपनी my reading, I'll tell you. My reading of smart cities movement is about 20 years ago, government of India found that cities have become very important economically. India की जो economy है, GDP जो है India की, उसका almost 2/3 of India's GDP now comes from urban areas. Rural areas की only 1/3 रह गया GDP में contribution. Is it a good thing? No, because 66, almost 2/3 of our population lives in rural areas that are contributing 1/3 of the GDP. 1/3 of the population living in urban areas contributing 2/3 of the GDP. And out of those 1/3 people living in urban areas, the largest cities, 50, 60, 100 largest cities contribute even bigger share of that GDP. Now, good, bad to एक अलग side है, but what's for the government was important or the state is important is to realize कि यार इस city से पैसे आ रहे हैं. This is where the tax and revenue and India's growth is coming from. And cities are not, Indian cities are some of the hardest places to live in. हर चीज की problem है, पानी की problem है, हवा की problem, traffic, transport, green. You guys live it, you know it. और ये क्यों प्रॉब्लम है? क्योंकि पिछले 100 साल से इन्वेस्टमेंट ही नहीं किया, because we didn't have money. Whatever money the government had surplus, we were making steel plants, we were creating a nation, we were creating new cities, we were creating industrial plants. पिछले 20, 25, 30 साल से पैसे आए, which we have begun to invest. So वो पैसे कैसे invest करें? How does the central government give money to the state and to the local government? Remember, in India, urban development and housing is a state subject. That means Maharashtra Sashan would decide what happens to the towns and urban areas in Maharashtra, not the central government and not the local government, right? state governments have this power according to Division of Powers, Constitution of India. So now Government of India wants to improve the city. The 3 tiers of government, right? Central government, state government, and local government. So state government did a clever thing. They created a vehicle. First time they called it, UPA government did it first. They called it JNNURM. Congress की government की, they named it after Nehru. And the idea was कि central government सीधे पैसे देगी city को. सीधे city को देगी, right? Bypassing the state. For city to make a city development plan and to do a project, but the city and the state would have to put money into it. If Maharashtra does not want JNNURM money, then they don't have to do it. But if you want JNNURM money, then you would have to give that money directly to cities. And cities would have to do some reforms. And thus, Delhi se paisa seedhe Mumbai aayega, right? State government ko bypass karte hue almost. Now, this is a clever ploy. It's clever ploy in the sense कि state government को आपने bypass कर दिया, वरना state governments would not allow cities to do what cities want to do or identify projects. And the second was कि कुछ reforms को promote करें. Policy-wise, I think this was a good move because historically we know Delhi always took money from places. Delhi never gives nobody nothing for free. You know, Delhi का अपना political agenda है, वो अपने हिसाब से चलता है. State governments अपने हिसाब से चलती हैं. Local governments have their own priorities. So this was a good thing that some of the central money was finding its way to local places. Now, as we know, government changed. Congress government lost. BJP came. The BJP government would not fund a scheme called JNNURM. So उन्होंने scheme तो रखी. They kept the scheme. The scheme was to transfer central money directly to cities. उसका नाम बदल दिया, you know, and हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर को शौक है जुमलों का, उनको ऐसे स्मार्ट ना, स्मार्ट सिटी बना दो. What does that mean? It means essentially the same idea. The central money would come to the city and city would decide where we want to put that money. कहने को आप उसको smart कह लें, handsome city कह लें, beautiful city कह लें, green city कह लें. I mean, that's the name, right? That's the jumla. That's the tag. You can call a burger aloo tikki burger. It does not change the fact that it's a burger nonetheless, right? Now, just don't go into that idea what smart means, what would do, smart mein kya hoga or unsmart kya. There's a whole discourse that sort of got generated around that idea. Us pe mat jao. No. The scheme is simple. Central government wants Indian cities to do better. They're sending money straight from Delhi to the city. The city has to make a scheme. The city has to decide कि पैसे हम कहाँ लगाएंगे, कैसे लगाएंगे, किस project को undertake करेंगे. फिर city makes those plans. State government has to chip in some money, but state government is more or less bypassed because center sets the gajar और वो होता है ना gajar and stick. The center की gajar is money and stick is if you don't do it, won't give you money. Yeah, so that's the way Anuj to think of smart cities ka political agenda. The good thing is irrespective government change ho gayi, but the idea remained कि यार पैसे cities को improve करना है. So urban improvement and urban development and city planning and urban design and architecture and design of public spaces, whatever name you might want to call it. I think I'm less interested in names and tags, more interested in what's the substantial argument that's being made. That governments across political divide in India have clarified that city improvement में पैसे देंगे, cities की quality को सुधारना है, and once Indian society and the government together decide ये करना है, फिर वो उसको कर देते हैं. So cities का, I feel, you know, I'm more optimistic. I think another 30, 40, 50 years में urban India would be a much better place to live in, much better, ecologically, environmentally, socially. करना किसको है? आप लोगों को करना है. Uttara and I do not have much time. Hopefully, we would be out of all of this rut pretty soon. But you guys have to do it, right? So that's the idea here. That there is money. This is a good time to be an architect and a designer and an urban practitioner. There's social support. There's government support. There's JNNURM was 65,000 crore rupees. That's a lot of zeros, right? And smart cities was 1 lakh crore rupees, the last iteration, and now this is episode 2 which is going on. right? And after the pandemic, people have realized the importance of cities even more, and the quality of urban spaces even more. You guys are in a good spot. This is a good time to become an architect, but pay attention to the larger picture. That's what I'm trying to alert you. You can always do the interiors, and you can always do the landscape, and you can always do the building design, but bigger action is on this larger changes that are sort of shaping the way we as Indians think about city living, and as we think about the future of this geography that has what 1.3 billion people.
Hi, sir. I have a question for you. As we all know that there is a Central Vista project which the government has funded right now. So a project like this, first I want to know your opinion on this, and the second, that if there is such a project with so many issues, political as well as religious and activist and everything going on, so what will one do as an architect or a town planner, as this is going to further affect the image of the person who is working for it? So
yeah, this is a political question. You know, I would be happy to अगर हम लोग ये in person हो रही थी ना the talk, if this event was in person, if I was visiting Mumbai, so I would have said कि चाय पे चर्चा करते हैं once the talk event is over. So I mean, you know, but nonetheless, I'll take it up and try to offer some observations since we do not have chai pe charcha. I personally, I mean, I think the government decides. You know, the government of the day has full power and legitimacy and standing to decide कि उनको कहाँ पर बनाना है और क्या बनाना है. ये तो उनकी जमीन है. This is not a private land, right? This is land is owned by the government, and the government decides we want to make it sure, right? Purani hai parliament. Parliament was not made for parliament. This parliament building was actually made for the British Council, right? फिर उसके बाद उसमें 2 हाउस बनाने पड़ गए इनको. तो जो प्रिंस वाला चैम्बर था उसको राज्यसभा बना दिया, और जो इलेक्टेड चैम्बर था, पीपल्स चैम्बर था, उसको लोकसभा बना दिया. फिर वो बढ़ गए तो उसको किसी, you can imagine, right? A building that was made in 1910 and 1920s for a very different purpose, and now almost 100 years being used for very different. So there is some merit कि ज़्यादा जगह चाहिए थी, a better area. So that's one. The second is the whole political. I mean, these projects are always political. New Delhi was founded as a political project. क्यों बनाने जरूरत थी New Delhi? Why did they need? कलकत्ता में चल रही थी सरकार अंग्रेज की, right? Mumbai was the commercial capital. Mumbai was doing well. British government was doing well in Calcutta. Why did they have to move the capital to Delhi? Because अंग्रेज को पता था कि historically Delhi has ruled this subcontinent. For last at least 2,000 years, we have a documented history of 7 cities of Delhi. Whosoever became powerful in South Asia established. जब तक वो दिल्ली नहीं जीत लेता तब तक वो नहीं होगा. इस कारण लाल किले के ऊपर झंडा लगाना पड़ेगा. So that's why so the whole creation of Delhi at that level, from the perspective of political angle, was that the project was political to begin with. So this is layers of politics. That's one way to think of it. Similarly, Chandigarh was a political, because Punjab की capital तो लाहौर में चली गई, और बोले अभी जो इंडिया के पास पंजाब है इसमें कैपिटल ही, सरदार बहुत नाराज हो रहे हैं कि साला हमारे पास तो कोई शहर भी नहीं है. तो नेहरू said no, इनके लिए न्यू सिटी बनाओ चंडीगढ़ and get a world class architect and will put in the money. And so it's a political project, right? I mean, of course it is a political project. So 75 years हो रहे हैं इंडिया की इंडिपेंडेंस को, shortly next year 2022, and this is sort of part of, think of it that as part of larger this thing कि वो उसको बनाना चाहते हैं. And then is the optics of it कि किसको आर्किटेक्ट सेलेक्ट किया, किसको प्लानर किया, क्या प्रोसेस था, उनका क्या डिजाइन है, क्या वो उसमें फिट होता है नहीं होता. These are all later questions, but the larger question that you ask, yes, indeed, it's a political project. Making of capital cities and shaping of them. I mean, Jaipur is a fantastic example of this. Jaipur banane ki, asli to koi zarurat nahi thi. Amer, if you guys have been to, so there is Amer and then there is Jaipur. Amer had been the capital of that region for 800 years. Jaipur is founded only in 1727. Amer is there since 9th century AD. So 9th century says 1727 tak Amer served as the capital of that entire geographical region. Jai Singh, once he realized that he's got the money and he's got political power and the Mughals are going down in power and prestige, तो बोला अब अपने को कौन रोकेगा? अब तो अपन ही इधर का बॉस कौन है? बोले आप ही भाई हो इधर के, तो अपन नई सिटी बनाते हैं. So they founded Jaipur as a brand new capital city. He said, who's the best architect? They said, we can get someone from West Bengal, a person called Vidyadhar Bhattacharya. So they hired Vidyadhar Bhattacharya, originally a Bengali Brahmin, right, to design this city, and then he puts in muscle and state power. So creation of the argument is creation and shaping of political capitals and important cities is always a political act, always a political. So वो तो मान के ही चलना चाहिए अपने को. बाकी सब उसके अंदर स्मॉलर पॉइंट्स है कि कौन आर्किटेक्ट है, कौन प्लानर है, क्या बना रहे हैं, बनाने की जरूरत थी नहीं थी. Once we realize, more important to my mind is that it should be well made, it should be green, it should serve the purpose of this country. Those are more important questions in my understanding rather than other issues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You were.
Sanjeev, Anuj has complimented your answer to these questions. There are some small questions from Anuj which I would like to ask, and I would like to give one question to the students also. So please keep your questions ready in case. So Anuj has first asked the question. I could not take it up before because it was in YouTube. Can you comment on the various stakeholders that prepare the plan? For example, Bombay plan of 1944-45, the Modak Mayor plan of 1948, and the more recent ones. So some of it, I think you have already answered in the answers before, but could you probe upon that? And another thing which is asked is cultural legacies are not being celebrated in these developments. So a comment on that too.
Uttara, just to get this right, Anuj is interested in who were the stakeholders.
Yeah,
in these different plans.
Yeah, comment to the various stakeholders that prepare the plan. For example, Bombay plan of 1944-45, Modak Mayor plan of 1948, and the more recent ones.
Now, this is Anuj. The way to think of it is that it has become progressively more. Number of stakeholders have become involved in plans. Planning was not a recognized activity until very recently. The colonial British would, the word to be used would be amateur. अंग्रेज को ये एमेट्योर का बड़ा शौक था, है ना. जैसे टेनिस का भी टूर्नामेंट होगा, एक तो होगा प्रोफेशनल टूर्नामेंट और एक होगा एमेच्योर्स. Not a professional, right? I don't do this for a living, but मैं शौक से, एवोकेशन. अंग्रेज के शौक बहुत होते थे. तो जो जैसे जयपुर में टाउन प्लानर नहीं था. After Vidyadhar Bhattacharya ji does this, but जो ब्रिटिश सर्जन था उसको शौक था बिल्डिंग बनाऊंगा. So whether even the few architects, British colonial architects who would come and sort of contribute to city planning, but a lot of planning was done by railway engineers, army engineers, civil surgeons, principals, Jesuit priests. बहुत सारे लोग planning activity में involved थे. But ये जो आपने 2-3 plans बताए, these are sort of the earliest plans, formal plans that were done in Mumbai. My suspicion is very small group of people have historically done planning. So the Bombay presidency के governor ने बुलाया सेक्रेटरी को कहा ऐसे इसका प्लान बनाना है, या बीएमसी के कमिश्नर ने, and then 3-4 people made it. So not more than 8, 10, 20 people perhaps were involved in the discussion before the plan for millions of people was finalized. वही system था. All, whether it was a royal princely state like Jaipur, or whether it was a British residency or British state or British province or British city. Few people, mostly men. No, all men, and almost all senior in age. They were not young people. They were mostly old men who would get together and decide कि कैसा होगा. जिसके खिलाफ feminist and आज की तारीख में liberal, and there's a whole discourse against that. But that's true for, and it's not only, as I said, India, but most of the world. New York or Chicago के plan भी ऐसे ही बनते थे. Few people would get together. These are powerful people, either virtue of money or their political standing or their elite birth or their landed property. ये resourceful अमीर लोग हैं, और they get together and they make the plan. अब ये धीमे धीमे shift होता गया, ज्यादा हुआ है stakeholders का participation. So, for example, later plans invariably सबसे पहले तो आपको अब लोकल जो elected politicians है सबसे बात करनी पड़ती है. Your parshad and your councillor and your MLA and your MP, and then all the different state government agencies get involved. Roads and utilities and electricity and water supply and sewerage and parks. And so that itself, is a vast number of people. Then resident welfare associations, different kinds. So that has continued to increase. Is it ideal? Not yet. Would it get ideal? Hopefully soon. But that's the direction it has sort of begun to move. This is sort of Shreya's question sort of got to it, but your question is more pointed. I think within even the plan making, जो team है ना, जो team plan making बनाती है, मोदक मेयर प्लान में तो क्लियर है, 2 जनों ने मिलकर बनाया. अब आज की तारीख में जो currently BMC में प्लान बन रहा है, that team itself would have 200 people, different architects, planners, economists, sociologists, officials. So the team का size बढ़ गया, and then the number of people they talk to has increased, and the process itself requires इसको publish कर, ये बात कर, वो बात कर, so बढ़ गया है बहुत ज़्यादा. Ideal है? No, not yet, but hopefully we'll get there soon.
Yeah, I think you have quite much answered most of the questions. It was a really interesting session, of the wide array of stakeholders, and maybe whom you have to really consciously involve, though they might not be impacted directly as much as the people. So maybe the people's empowerment really needs to come into picture to have that, equitable space in the planning process. Yeah. So actually, Sanjeev, this idea of a talk called, inviting you for the talk came up with a design exercise for the semester 9, where we looked at infill spaces and how communities can empower and find out the needs of the place and justify it to stakeholders. So this is how this was, the root of how this talk sort of got inspired. So thank you very much. I must say we had a wonderful insights evening with you today. Our students and faculty find it fortunate to have heard from a person with such experience and credentials, and also for sharing your thoughts and experiences on the domain of, the process of not only urban design and planning, but what goes behind the scene, forming a larger context of architecture. On behalf of the Insights Committee and the LSR School of Architecture, Mumbai, we would like to thank you for being a featured speaker for the Insights talk today. We thankfully appreciate and acknowledge you for taking out time from your busy schedule. It was a pleasure for our students and faculty to connect to you. And we look forward to you to associate our college students for collaborative academic programs and guidance in future. So we stay connected, and whenever you come to India, we'll surely have a chai pe charcha with our students. We'll invite you to the college. I would really like you to come to our college.
Absolutely. No, this is, I want to echo Uttara's comments. Bilkul, I enjoyed it very much. I'm glad you guys working on an infill development project. That's sort of the need of the hour. A lot of work at that scale needs to happen, right? So infill is essentially an urban issue because then you're paying attention to the surrounding. Hum plonk nahi kar rahe na buildings. So, but nonetheless, fantastic. I wish you guys all the best, and I'm always reachable over email. And I'm happy to help in any way I can. And you guys need to do great work, and that's the message at some point in time, right? We have to make better plans, and we have to do better efforts than we have done in the past. So thanks a lot, Uttara, for giving me this opportunity to meet with your colleagues and to get together with you after a long time.
I would also like to thank Principal Mandar sir, my co-faculty members Arun sir, Anuj sir, Anjali ma'am, Swanand sir, and student Jinay who made the poster. So all these contributions made the event possible.
Wonderful.
And we had a fantastic response. Our meet was full. Our YouTube audience was also, we had people in large numbers. Okay, so we wish you all the very best. And all the audience, thank you for being enthusiastically attending this session at the end of a tiring day. You made this event a success.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Goodbye and take care.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Thank you so much.
Sanjeev. Say hi to
Thank
people.
you. Yes, I will. Okay.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll get
Bye.
back to you.
Bye.
Yeah? Bye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Anjali.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.